hand in hand, they moved into the shadows of the fire swamp. Wesley led the way. Buttercup stayed just behind, and they made, from the outset, very good time. The main thing, she realized, was to forget your childhood dreams. For the fire swamp was bad, but it wasn't that bad. The sudden burst of flames were easily avoided because just before they struck, there was a deep kind of popping sound clearly coming from the vicinity where the flames would then appear. "We must get through the fire swamp," Wesley began, "for one and good and simple reason. On the far end of the fire swamp is the mouth of the giant Eel Bay, and anchored far out in the deepest waters of that bay is the great ship Revenge. The Revenge is the sole property of the dread pirate Roberts." "The man who killed you?" Buttercup said. "That man? The one who broke my heart? The dread pirate Roberts? Took your life. That was the story I was told." "Quite correct," Wesley said. "And that ship is our destination." "You know the dread pirate Roberts? You're friendly with such a man?" "It's a little more than that," Wesley said. "I am the dread pirate Roberts." "I fail to see how that is possible, since he has been marauding for 20 years, and you only left me 3 years ago." "I myself am often surprised at life's little quirks," Wesley admitted. "Did he in fact capture you when you were sailing for the Carolinas?" "He did. His ship Revenge captured the ship I was on, the Queen's Pride. And we were all to be put to death." "But Roberts did not kill you?" "Clearly." "Why?" "I cannot say for sure, but I think it was because I asked him please not to. The please, I suspect, aroused his interest. At any rate, he held off with his sword long enough to ask, 'Why should I make an exception of you?' And I explained my mission, and how I had to get to America to get money to reunite me with the most beautiful woman ever reared by man, namely you. 'And if you will let me live,' I said, 'I will be your personal valet and slave for 5 full years. And if I ever once complain or cause you anger, you may chop my head off then and there, and I will die with praise for your fairness on my lips.'" "What happened?" Buttercup urged. "Go on." "At the end of 1 year, my captain said to me, 'Enough of this valet business, Wesley. From now on, you are my second in command. I'm going to retire soon, Wesley, and the Revenge will be yours.' He agreed to let me assist him in the next few captures and see how I liked it, which I did. Not only did I like it, but it turned out I was talented as well. So talented that Robert said to me one April morning, 'Wesley, the next ship is yours. Let's see how you do.' That afternoon, we spotted a fat Spanish beauty loaded for Madrid. I sailed up close. They were in a panic. 'Who is it?' their captain cried. 'Wesley,' I told them. 'Never heard of you,' he answered, and with that they opened fire. Disaster. They had no fear of me at all. I was so flustered I did everything wrong, and soon they got away. Roberts called me to his cabin. 'Buck up,' he told me. 'What I am about to tell you I have never said before, and you must guard it closely. I am not the dread pirate Roberts,' he said. 'My name is Ryan. I inherited this ship from the previous dread pirate Roberts, just as you will inherit it from me.' I confessed my confusion. 'It's really very simple,' Ryan explained. 'After several years, the original Roberts was so rich he wanted to retire. Clooney was his friend and first mate, so he gave the ship to Clooney, who had an identical experience to yours. The first ship he attempted to board nearly blew him out of the water. So Roberts, realizing that the name was the thing that inspired the necessary fear, sailed the Revenge to port, changed crews entirely, and Clooney told everyone he was the dread pirate Roberts. And who was to know he was not? When Clooney retired rich, he passed the name to Cummerbund to me, and I, Felix Raymond Ryan, now dub thee Wesley, the dread pirate Roberts." Wesley smiled at Buttercup. "So now you know. And you should also realize why it is foolish to be afraid." "But I am afraid." "It will all be happy at the end. Consider. A little over 3 years ago you were a milkmaid and I was a farm boy. Now you're almost a queen and I rule uncontested on the water. Surely such individuals were never intended to die in a fire swamp." "How can you be so sure?" "Well, because we're together, hand in hand, in love." "Oh, yes," Buttercup said. "I keep forgetting that." Both her words and her tone were a trifle standoffish, something Wesley surely would have noticed had not a ROUS, a rodent of unusual size, attacked him from the tree branch, sinking its giant teeth into his unprotected shoulder, forcing him to earth in a very unexpected spurt of blood. The other two that had been following launched their attack then, too, ignoring Buttercup, driving forward with all their hungry strength to Wesley's bleeding shoulder. The rats struggled with each other to reach Wesley's wound. Their enormous front teeth tore at the unprotected flesh of his left shoulder. And he had no idea if Buttercup was already half devoured. He only knew that if he didn't do something desperate right then and right there, she soon would be. So he intentionally rolled his body into a spurt of flame. His clothes began to burn. That he expected. But more important, the rats shied away from the heat and the flames for just an instant. But that was just enough for him to reach and throw his long knife into the heart of the nearest beast. The other two turned instantly on their own kind and began eating it while it was still screaming. Wesley took Buttercup's hand, and again they started to move. It was nearly dusk when they at last saw the great ship Revenge, far out in the deepest part of the bay. Wesley, still within the confines of the fire swamp, sank, beaten, to his knees. For between him and his ship were more than a few inconveniences. From the north sailed in half the great armada, from the south now the other half, 100 mounted horsemen, armored and armed. In front of them the Count, and out alone in front of all, the 4 whites, with the prince astride the leader. Wesley stood. "We took too long in crossing. The fault is mine." "I accept your surrender," the prince said. Wesley held Buttercup's hand. "No one is surrendering." "Surrender!" the prince shouted. "Death first!" Wesley roared. "Will you promise not to hurt him?" Buttercup whispered. "What was that?" the prince said. "What was that?" Wesley said. Buttercup took a step forward and said, "If we surrender freely and without struggle, if life returns to what it was one dusk ago, will you swear not to hurt this man?" Prince Humperdinck raised his right hand. "I swear on the grave of my soon-to-be-dead father and on the soul of my already dead mother that I shall not hurt this man, and if I do, may I never hunt again, though I live 1,000 years." Buttercup turned to Wesley. "There," she said, "you can't ask for more than that, and that is the truth." "The truth," said Wesley, "is that you would rather live with your prince than die with your love." "I would rather live than die, I admit it." "We were talking of love, madam." There was a long pause. Then Buttercup said it. "I can live without love." And with that she left Wesley alone. Prince Humperdinck watched her as she began the long cross to him. "When we are out of sight," he said to Count Rugen, "take that man in black and put him in the 5th level of the Zoo of Death." The Count nodded. "For a moment I believed you when you swore." "I spoke the truth. I never lie," the prince replied. "I said I would not hurt him, but I never for a moment said he would not suffer pain. You will do the actual tormenting. I will only spectate." He opened his arms then for the princess. "He belongs to the ship Revenge," Buttercup said. "He is a simple sailor, and I have known him since I was a child. Will you arrange that?" "Must I swear again?" "No need," Buttercup said, because she knew, as did everyone, that the prince was more forthright than any Florinese. "Come along, my princess." He took her hand. Buttercup went away with him. Wesley watched it all. He stood silently at the edge of the fire swamp. He had been bitten, cut, gone without rest, had assaulted the cliffs of insanity, had saved and taken lives. He had risked his world, and now it was walking away from him, hand in hand with a ruffian prince. Then Buttercup was gone, out of sight. Wesley sagged. "Come, sir," Count Rugen approached. "We must get you safely to your ship." "We are both men of action," Wesley replied. "Lies do not become us." "Well spoken," said the Count, and with one sudden swing he clubbed Wesley into insensitivity. Wesley fell like a beaten stone, his last conscious thought being of the Count's right hand. It was 6-fingered, and Wesley could never quite remember having encountered that deformity before. When Inigo regained consciousness, it was still night on the cliffs of insanity. Inigo stirred, blinked, tried to rub his eyes, couldn't. His arms were tied together around a tree. Inigo looked around as best he could, and there it was, the 6-fingered sword, glittering in the moonlight, like lost magic. Inigo stretched his right leg as far as it would go and managed to touch the handle. Then it was simply a matter of inching the weapon close enough to be graspable by one hand, and then it was an even simpler task to slash the bindings. The major problem was what to do now. Vincini had strict instructions for occasions such as this. When a plan went wrong, go back to the beginning. Back to the beginning and wait for Vincini, then regroup, replan, start again. Inigo had even made a little rhyme out of it for Fezzik so the giant would not have problems remembering what to do in time of trouble. Fool, fool, back to the beginning is the rule. Inigo knew precisely where the beginning was. They had gotten a job in Florence City itself, the thieves' quarter. So the thieves' quarter was clearly the place to go. Fezzik had no idea how long he was unconscious. He only knew, as he staggered to his feet on the mountain path, that his throat was very sore where the man in black had strangled him. What to do? The plans had all gone wrong. Fezzik closed his eyes, trying to think. There was a proper place to go when plans went wrong, but he couldn't quite remember it. Inigo had even made a rhyme up for him so he wouldn't forget. And now, even with that, he was so stupid he had forgotten. What was it? Was it, stupid, stupid, go and wait for Vincini with Cupid? That rhymed, but what kind of instructions were those? Fezzik ran off into the night after the Sicilian. Vincini was napping when he got there. He had been drinking wine and dozed off. Fezzik dropped to his knees and put his hands in a prayer position. "Vincini, I'm sorry," he began. Vincini napped on. Fezzik shook him gently. Vincini did not wake. "Oh, I see. You're dead," Fezzik said. He stood up. "He's dead, Vincini is," he said softly. And then, with not a bit of help from his brain, a great scream of panic burst from his throat into the night. "Inigo!" And he whirled back down the mountain path, because if Inigo was alive, it would be all right. It wouldn't be the same, no, it could never be that without Vincini to order them and insult them as only he could, but at least there would be time for poetry. And when Fezzik reached the cliffs of insanity, he said, "Inigo, Inigo, here I am," to the rocks, and, "I'm here, Inigo, it's your Fezzik," to the trees, until there was no other conclusion to draw, but that just as there was no Vincini, so there was also no Inigo, and that was hard. It was, in point of fact, too hard for Fezzik, so he began to run, crying out, "Be with you in a minute, Inigo, and right behind you, Inigo." On he ran, and on and on and on, until finally he reached a tiny village and found just outside town some nice rocks that formed kind of a cave, almost big enough for him to stretch out in. Fezzik huddled up in his cave. Wesley awoke, chained in a giant cage. His shoulder was beginning to fester from the gnawing and digging that the ROUSs had done into his flesh. He ignored his discomfort momentarily to try and adjust to his surroundings. Shortly after his return to consciousness, an albino appeared, bloodless, with skin as pale as dying birch. The albino held a tray which carried many things, bandages and food, healing powders and brandy. "Where are we?" from Wesley. A shrug from the albino. "Who knows I'm here?" Whispered. "I know. They know." "They?" Shrug. "The prince and the count, you mean?" Nod. "And that is all?" Nod. "Am I to die, then?" Shrug. Wesley closed his eyes. There was pain coming, and he had to be ready for it. He had to prepare his brain. He had to get his mind controlled and safe from their efforts, so that they could not break him. He would not let them break him. When there were 50 days to go before the wedding, Buttercup knocked on the door to Prince Humperdinck's chambers. She entered when he bid her to. "I see trouble," he said. "You look very ill." And so she did. Beautiful, of course, still that, but in no way well. "It comes to this," Buttercup began. "In the fire swamp I made the worst mistake in all the world. I love Wesley. I always have. It seems I always will. I did not know this when you came to me. Please believe what I am about to say. When you said that I must marry you or face death, I answered, 'Kill me.' I meant that. I mean this now, too. If you say I must marry you in 50 days, I will be dead by morning." The prince was literally stunned. After a long moment, he knelt by Buttercup's chair and in his gentlest voice started to speak. "I admit that when we first became engaged, there was to be no love involved. That was as much my choice as yours, though the notion may have come from you. But surely you must have noticed, in this last month of parties and festivities, a certain warming of my attitude." "I have. You have been both sweet and noble. Thank you. Having said that, I hope you appreciate how difficult this next sentence is for me to say. I would die myself rather than cause you unhappiness by standing in the way of your marrying the man you love. Buttercup wanted almost to weep with gratitude. She said, I will bless you for all my days for your kindness. Then she stood. So it's settled. Our wedding is off. He stood too. Except for perhaps one thing. That being, have you considered the possibility that he might not now want any longer to marry you? Until that moment she had not. Consider, dearest, here he is off sailing somewhere with the dread pirate Roberts. He has a month to survive the emotional scars you dealt him. What if he wants now to remain single? Or worse, what if he has found another? I think, sweetest child, that we should strike a bargain, you and I. If Wesley wants to marry you still, bless you both. If, for reasons unpleasant to mention, his pride will not let him, then you will marry me as planned and be the Queen of Florin. He couldn't be married, I'm sure. Not my Wesley. She looked at the prince. But how can I find out? What about this? You write him a letter telling him everything. We'll make 4 copies. I'll take my 4 fastest ships and order them off in all directions. The dread pirate Roberts is not often more than a month's sail from Florin. Whichever of my ships finds him will run the white flag of truce, deliver your letter, and Wesley can decide. I'm not sure, but I definitely think that this is the most generous decision I have yet heard. Do me this favor in return, then. Until we know Wesley's intentions, one way or another, let us continue as we have, so the festivities will not be halted. And if I seem too fond of you, remember, I cannot help myself. There was no doubt whatsoever in his mind that he was going to seem too fond of her in the days ahead, because when she died of murder on their wedding night, it was crucial that all Florin realized the depth of his love, the epical size of his loss. Since then, no one would dare hesitate to follow him in the revenge he was to launch against Gilder. At first, when he hired the Sicilian, he was convinced it was best that someone else do her in, all the while making it appear the work of soldiers from Gilder. And when the man in black had somehow materialized to spoil his plans, the prince came close to going insane with rage. But now his basically optimistic nature had reasserted itself. Everything always worked out for the best. The people were infatuated with Buttercup now, as they had never been before her kidnapping. And when he announced from his castle balcony that she had been murdered, he already saw the scene in his mind. He would arrive just too late to save her from strangling, but soon enough to see the Gilderian soldiers leaping from the window of his bedroom to the soft ground below. When he made that speech to the masses on the 500th anniversary of his country, well, there wouldn't be a dry eye on the square. And although he was just the least bit perturbed, since he had never actually killed a woman before with his bare hands, there was a first time for everything. Besides, if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. That night they began to torture Wesley. Count Rugen did the actual pain-inducing. The prince simply sat by, asking questions out loud, inwardly admiring the count's skill. The count really cared about pain. The whys behind the screams interested him fully as much as the anguish itself. Who hired you to kidnap the princess? It was someone from Gilder? Tell me that man's name and you are free. Speak. No one hired me, Wesley said. I was working strictly freelance, and I did not kidnap her. I saved her from others who were doing that very thing. The count set fire to Wesley's hands. Nothing permanent or disabling. He just dipped Wesley's hands in oil and brought a candle close enough to set things bubbling. When Wesley had screamed, "No one! No one! No one! On my life!" a sufficient number of times, the count dipped Wesley's hands in water, and he and the prince left via the underground entrance. Wesley suffered not at all throughout. His screaming was totally a performance to please them. The minute the count brought the candle close, Wesley raised his eyes to the ceiling, dropped his eyelids over them, and in a state of deep and steady concentration, he took his brain away. Buttercup was what he thought of. To tell the absolute truth, torture was never all that high on Prince Humperdinck's scale of passions, and he would just as soon have disposed of Wesley right then. If only Buttercup would admit that he, Humperdinck, was the better man. But she would not. She simply would not. All she ever talked about was Wesley. When they were alone, all she ever said was, "I wonder where Wesley could be. What could be taking him so long? How can I live until he comes?" Maddening. So each night the Count's discomforts, which made Wesley writhe and twist, were really sort of all right. Wesley had felt no pain, not once, none. He had closed his eyes and taken his brain away. That was the secret. If you could take your brain away from the present and send it to where it could contemplate skin like wintry cream, well, let them enjoy themselves. Prince Humperdinck realized just 12 days before his wedding day that he had neglected to set in motion the crucial Gilder section of his plan, so he called Yellen to the castle late one night. Yellen was chief of all enforcement in Florence City. "Your Highness," Yellen said. He was small but crafty, with darting eyes and slippery hands. Prince Humperdinck came out from behind his desk. "I have heard from unimpeachable sources that men from Gilder have of late begun to infiltrate our thieves' quarter. They are disguised as Florinese, and I am worried." "I understand," said Yellen. "And you think, since the evidence points that they tried to kidnap your fiancée once, such a thing might happen again?" "It's a possibility." "I'll close off the thieves' quarter, then," Yellen said. "No one will enter and no one will leave." "Not good enough," said the prince. "I want the thieves' quarter emptied and every villain jailed until I am safely on my honeymoon." Yellen bowed and started to leave. And that was when the scream began. Yellen had heard many things in his life, but nothing quite so eerie as this. He was a brave man, but this sound frightened him. It was not human, but he could not guess the throat of the beast it came from. It was actually a wild dog, on the first level of the zoo, but no wild dog had ever shrieked like that before. But then no wild dog had ever been put in the machine. Count Rugen left the zoo and ran toward Prince Humperdinck's chambers. When Yellen was gone and they were alone, the Count bowed to His Majesty. "The machine," he said at last, "works." When the Count appeared with the machine, Wesley was not particularly perturbed. As a matter of fact, he had no idea what the Count was bringing with him into the giant cage. As a matter of absolute fact, the Count was bringing nothing. It was the albino who was doing the actual work, making trip after trip with thing after thing. That was what it really looked like to Wesley, things. Little soft-rimmed cups of various sizes and a wheel, most likely, and another object that could turn out to be either a lever or a stick. It was hard to tell. "This is the machine," the Count said when they were alone. "I've spent 11 years constructing it. As you can tell, I'm rather excited and proud. One of my theories is that pain involves anticipation. Nothing original, I admit, but I'm going to demonstrate to you what I mean. I will not use the machine on you this evening. I will simply erect it and leave it beside you, for you to stare at the next 24 hours, wondering just what it is and how it works, and can it really be as dreadful as all that?" He tightened some things here, loosened more over there, tugged and patted and shaped. "I'll leave you to your imagination, then," the Count said. "Well, could you sleep?" the Count asked the next night upon his arrival in the cage. "Quite honestly, no," Wesley replied. "I suppose you're naturally curious as to how this works." "I have spent the night pondering, and I know no more than when I started. It appears to be a great conglomeration of soft-rimmed cups of infinitely varied sizes, together with a wheel and a dial and a lever, and what it does is beyond me. Also glue," added the Count, pointing to a small tub of thick stuff, "to keep the cups attached." And with that he set to work, taking cup after cup, touching the soft rims with glue, and setting them against Wesley's skin. "Now all I do," the Count said, "is get the wheel going to its fastest spin so that I have more than enough power to operate. And the dial can be set from 1 to 20. This time being the first, I will set it to the lowest setting, which is 1. And then all I need do is push the lever forward, and we should, if I haven't gummed it up, be in full operation." But Wesley, as the lever moved, took his brain away, and when the machine began, Wesley was stroking her autumn-colored hair and touching her skin of wintry cream, and then his world exploded, because the cups were everywhere, and before they had punished his body but left his brain. Only not the machine. The machine reached everywhere. His brain slid away, slid far from love into the deep vault of despair, down through the house of agony into the county of pain. Inside and out, Wesley's world was ripping apart, and he could do nothing but crack along with it. The Count turned off the machine then, and as he picked up his notebooks, he said, "As you no doubt know, the concept of the suction pump is centuries old. Well, basically, that's all this is, except instead of sucking water, I'm sucking life. I've just sucked away 1 year of your life. Later, I'll set the dial higher, certainly to 2 or 3, perhaps even to 5. Theoretically, 5 should be 5 times more severe than what you've just endured. So please be specific in your answers. Tell me now, honestly, how do you feel? In humiliation and suffering and frustration and anger and anguish so great it was dizzying, Wesley cried like a baby. Interesting, said the Count, and carefully noted it down. The conquest of the Thieves' Quarter began. Yellen worked long and hard at it each day, but the Thieves' Quarter was a mile square, so there was much to do. 36 hours before the sunset wedding, there were half a dozen holdouts left in the Thieves' Quarter. Yellen gathered the best of the brute squad and led him into the quarter for what simply had to be the final foray. Is that everyone, then? Yellen asked as various brutes were visible leaving the Thieves' Quarter, pulling various wagons. I think there's still the fencer with the brandy, the noisy one began. See, they tried getting him out yesterday, but I can't be bothered with a drunk. Get him out of here, and do it now, both of you. Take that wagon with you, and be quick. This quarter must be locked and deserted by sundown. We're going, the noisy one replied. And he hurried off, letting the quiet one bring the wagon. They tried getting this fencer yesterday, some of the standard enforcers, but it seems he has certain sword skills that make him wary. But I think I have a trick that'll work. The quiet one hurried along behind, dragging the wagon. They rounded a corner, and from around another corner just up ahead, a kind of drunken mumbling was starting to get louder. I'm getting very bored, Vizzini, came from out of sight. 3 months is a long time to wait, especially for a passionate Spaniard. Much louder now. And I am very passionate, Vizzini, and you are nothing but a tardy Sicilian. So if you're not here in 90 more days, I'm done with you. You hear? Done. The noisy brute slowed. That kind of talk goes on all day. Ignore it, and keep the wagon out of sight. The quiet one pushed the wagon almost to the corner and stopped. Stay with the wagon, the noisy one added, and then whispered, Here comes my trick. With that, he walked alone around the corner and stared ahead at the skinny fellow sitting clutching the brandy bottle on the stoop. Ho there, friend, the noisy one said. I'm not moving. Keep your ho there, said the brandy drinker. Hear me through, please. I have been sent by Prince Humperdinck himself, who is in need of entertainment. Tomorrow is our country's 500th anniversary, and the dozen greatest tumblers and fencers and entertainers are at this very moment competing. The finest pair will compete personally tomorrow for the new bride and groom. If you like, I, at great personal sacrifice, will rush you to the fencing contest, where, if you're as good as I'm told, you might have the honor of entertaining the royal couple tomorrow. The Spaniard managed to stand. He unsheathed his sword and flashed it a few times across the morning. The noisy one took a few steps backward and said, No time to waste. Come along now. Then the drunk started yelling, I'm waiting for Vizzini. Meanie. I'm not mean, I'm just following the rule. Cruel. Not cruel, not mean, can't you understand? And here his voice trailed off for a moment as he squinted. Then quietly he said, Fezzik? From behind the noisy one, the quiet one said, Who's Fezzik? Inigo took a step from his stoop, trying desperately to make his eyes focus through the brandy. Fezzik? Is that a joke you made? The quiet one said, Played. Inigo gave a cry and started staggering forward. Fezzik, it's you! True! And he reached out, grabbed Inigo just before he stumbled, brought him back to an upright position. Hold him just like that, the noisy brute said, and he moved in quickly, right arm raised. Splat! Fezzik dumped the noisy brute into the wagon, then hurried back to Inigo, whom he had left leaning, propped against a building. It's just so good to see you, Fezzik said then. Oh, it is, but... Inigo's voice was winding steadily down now. I'm too weak for surprises. Were the last sounds he got out before he fainted from fatigue and brandy and no food. Fezzik hoisted him up with one arm, took the wagon in the other, and hurried to an empty house in the Thieves' Quarter. The unexpected smell of hot food brought Inigo around, and he lay in bed, eating every bite Fezzik fed him. I never realized I was in such terrible condition, Inigo said, chewing away. You'll be as strong as ever by sundown, Fezzik promised. The six-fingered man is named Count Rugen, and he's here right now in Florence City. Interesting, Inigo managed. Well, it is good to see you, he said, and it's been such a long time, and I've only got just so much news. The man in black, did he get by you? Yes, fairly, too. Strength against strength. I was too slow and out of practice. Then it was he that killed Vizzini? That is my belief. All right, Vizzini is dead. Enough of that. Tell me briefly where the six-fingered Rugen is so I may kill him. That may not be so easy, Inigo, because the Count is with the Prince, and the Prince is in this castle, and he has pledged not to leave it until after his wedding, for he fears another sneak attack from Gilder. And all the entrances but the main one are sealed for safety, and the main doors are guarded by 20 men. And then Inigo was up, blazing about the kitchen, and for the first time his fingers were snapping with excitement. I need the man in black. Look, he bested me with steel, my greatness. He bested you with strength, yours. He must have outplanned and outthought Vizzini, and he will tell me how to break through the castle and kill the six-fingered beast. If you have the least notion where the man in black is at this moment, relate quickly the answer. He sails the 7 seas with the dread pirate Roberts. Why would he do a thing like that? Because he is a sailor for the dread pirate Roberts. He is sailing far away. Count Rugen says so, and the Prince himself gave the order. The Prince wants no pirates around, what with all the trouble he's having with Gilder. Remember, they kidnapped the princess once. They might try... Fezzik, we kidnapped the princess once. Vizzini was under orders to do it. Someone wanted Gilder to look guilty, and who but a noble would want that, and what noble more than the war-loving prince himself? And as for the Count's word on the man in black's whereabouts, since the Count is the same man who slaughtered my father, we can rest assured that he is certainly a terrific fellow. He started for the door. Come, we have much to do. Fezzik followed him through the darkening streets of the thieves' quarter. You'll explain things to me as we go along? Fezzik asked. I'll explain them to you. His blade-like body knifed through the quiet streets, Fezzik hurrying alongside. A, I need to reach Count Rugen to at last avenge my father. B, I cannot plan on how to reach Count Rugen. C, Vizzini could have planned it for me, but C prime, Vizzini is unavailable. However, D, the man in black outplanned Vizzini, so therefore E, the man in black, can get me to Count Rugen. But I told you, Prince Humperdinck, after he captured him, gave orders for all to hear that the man in black was to be returned safely to his ship. Everyone in Flora knows this to be so. A, Prince Humperdinck has some plans to kill his fiancée and hired us to carry them out. But B, the man in black ruined Prince Humperdinck's plans. However, eventually, C, Prince Humperdinck managed to capture the man in black, and as everybody in all Florence City also knows, Prince Humperdinck has a terrible temper. So therefore, D, if a man has a terrible temper, what could be more fun than losing it against the very fellow who spoiled your plans to kill your fiancée? They had reached the thieves' quarter wall now. Inigo jumped on Fezzik's shoulders, and Fezzik started to climb. Conclusion, Inigo continued, not missing a beat. Since the prince is in Florence City, taking out his temper on the man in black, the man in black must also be in Florence City. I am in Florence City and need a planner to avenge my father, while he is in Florence City and needs a rescuer to salvage his future. And when people have equal needs to each other, deals are made. It was dusk when they began their search blindly through all of Florence City. Dusk, a day before the wedding. It was dusk when Buttercup went to see the prince. Beloved, he said, come in. A moment more is all I need. And he turned back to Yellen, who was with him. Look at her, Yellen, my bride-to-be. Has any man ever been so blessed? The wedding is tomorrow sunset. My bride and I will ride my whites to Florin Channel, surrounded by all your enforcers. There we will board a ship and begin our long-awaited honeymoon, surrounded by every ship in the Florin Armada. Every ship but 4, Buttercup corrected. He blinked at her a moment in silence. Then he said, blowing her a kiss, but discreetly so Yellen couldn't see, Yes, how forgetful I am. Every ship but 4. He turned back to Yellen. But in his blink, in that following silence, Buttercup had seen it all. The 4 ships were never sent, Buttercup said. Don't bother lying to me any more. Whatever was done for your own good, Sweet Pudding. It doesn't matter whether you sent the ships or not. Wesley will come for me. You're a silly girl. Now go to your room. Yes, I am a silly girl. And yes, again, I will go to my room. And you are a coward with a heart filled with nothing but fear. Prince had to laugh. The greatest hunter in the world, and you say I am a coward? I do indeed. I think you hunt only to reassure yourself that you are not what you are, the weakest thing ever to walk the earth. He will come for me, and then we will be gone. And you will be helpless for all your hunting, because Wesley and I are joined by the bond of love, and you cannot track that, not with 1,000 bloodhounds, and you cannot break it, not with 1,000 swords. Humperdinck screamed toward her then, ripping at her autumn hair, yanking her from her feet and down the long, curving corridor to her room, where he tore that door open and threw her inside and locked her there and started running for the underground entrance to the Zoo of Death. And down he plunged, giant stride after giant stride. And when he threw the door of the fifth-level cage open, even Count Rugen was startled at the purity of whatever the emotion was that reflected in the prince's eyes. The prince moved to Wesley. "She loves you," the prince cried. "She loves you still, and you love her. So think of that. Think of this, too. In all this world, you might have been happy, genuinely happy. Not one couple in a century has that chance. Not really, no matter what the storybooks say. But you could have had it. And so I think no one will ever suffer a loss as great as you." And with that, he grabbed the dial and pushed it all the way forward, and the Count cried, "Not to 20!" But by then it was too late. The death scream had started. The death scream rose into the night. "I don't like that sound," Fezzik said, his skin for the moment cold. Inigo grabbed the giant, and the words began pouring out. Fezzik, that is the sound of ultimate suffering. I know that sound. That was the sound in my heart when Count Rugen slaughtered my father, and I saw him fall. The man in black makes it now. You think that's him? Who else has cause for ultimate suffering this celebration night?" And with that, he started to follow the sound. The albino came out, pulled the cups from the corpse, decided to burn the body on the garbage pyre behind the castle, which meant a wheelbarrow. He hurried up the underground stairs, came out the secret entrance, moved quickly to the main tool shed. He finally got the barrow out and was just passing the false and deadly supposed main entrance to the zoo when "I'm having the devil's own trouble tracking that scream" was spoken to him, and the albino whirled to find there in the castle grounds, a blade-thin stranger with a sword in his hand. The sword suddenly flicked its way to the albino's throat. "Did the scream come from that place?" The fellow indicated the main entrance. Nod. "And the throat it came from. I need this man, so be quick." Whispered. "Wesley." Inigo reasoned. "A sailor? Brought here by Rugen?" Nod. "And I reach him where?" "He is on the bottom level, 5 levels down." "Then I have no more need of you. Quiet him a while, Fezzik." From behind him, the albino was aware of a giant shadow moving. Funny, he thought, the last thing he remembered. I thought that was a tree. End of side 3.